Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into a topic that might seem pretty basic, but is actually super important. Improving your listening skills.
Yeah, we talk a lot about communication, but we don't always focus on the listening side of things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to guide our deep dive today, we're going to be looking at an article from FutureLearn called 7 Ways to Improve Your Listening Skills.
Ooh, that sounds interesting.
It is, and it starts off with a statistic that really caught my attention.
No?
It says that the average person only remembers 25% of what they hear in a lecture just a few minutes later.
Wow, that's pretty low.
Right, like you sit through an hour-long presentation and you only retain a quarter of it. That's why good listening is so crucial.
Absolutely. It's essential for both our personal and professional lives.
The article lists a whole bunch of benefits like better work performance, stronger relationships, improved problem-solving skills, and even being able to settle disagreements more effectively.
It's interesting because it's not just about avoiding misunderstandings or conflicts.
Yeah.
It's also about becoming more efficient and resourceful.
Right.
Like imagine making fewer mistakes at work because you actually listen to the instructions carefully.
Or not having to waste time asking for clarification over and over again.
Exactly. And these benefits extend to our personal lives too.
Absolutely. Like think about how much stronger your relationships could be if you were truly present and engaged when someone was talking to you.
It's about building trust, showing respect, and really connecting with the other person on a deeper level.
Couldn't agree more. But let's be honest, it's not always easy to be a good listener.
You're telling me. There are so many obstacles.
Right.
And the article does a great job of outlining some of the biggest ones.
Like what?
Well, first and foremost, distractions.
Oh yeah, those are everywhere.
Right, we live in a world of constant stimulation.
TVs, phones, social media, traffic noise, you name it.
It's like our brains have become accustomed to this state of partial attention.
Yeah, it's hard to fully focus on one thing when there's so much vying for our attention.
And it's not just external distractions either.
Oh, you mean like internal ones?
Exactly like our own thoughts and tendencies.
Like what?
Well, think about how often you interrupt someone or start planning what you're going to say next before they've even finished talking.
Oh yeah, or when you judge someone's viewpoint before they've even had a chance to fully explain it.
We've all been guilty of that at some point.
For sure.
It's like we're so caught up in our own heads that we're not fully present for the other person.
And I think that's where some deeper psychological barriers come into play.
Like what?
Well, the article mentions things like inaccurate assumptions, offering unsolicited advice, or letting our own emotions like fear, jealousy, or defensiveness cloud our ability to listen.
It's almost like we're putting up walls before the conversation even begins.
Yeah, exactly.
But the good news is that we can break down those walls and become more active, engaged listeners.
And how do we do that?
Well, that's where the 7 practical techniques from the article come in.
7. Okay.
Ready. The first one is so basic, but often overlooked. Eye contact.
Eye contact. Really?
Yeah. I mean, of course, the article acknowledges that cultural norms and neurodiversity play a role here.
Right.
But for many people, eye contact is a sign of respect and engagement.
Like you're saying, I'm here with you, I'm listening.
Exactly. It's about creating that connection.
Right.
But as the article points out, there's a balance to strike.
Oh yeah, you don't want to stare someone down and make them uncomfortable.
Right. But you also want to show them that you're present and attentive.
It's about being alert, but not unnerving.
Precisely. And that leads us to the next technique, which builds on that attentiveness.
Right.
Paying attention to nonverbal cues.
Ah, body language.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's fascinating because sometimes body language can reveal so much more than words alone.
Like you might say one thing, but your facial expression or your tone of voice might be saying something completely different.
Right. The article talks about things like facial expressions, tone of voice, posture, all those subtle signals that add another layer of meaning to the conversation.
It's like reading between the lines.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
again, the article reminds us to be mindful of cultural differences and individual preferences.
Right, because what might be considered polite or appropriate in one culture might be totally different in another.
Exactly.
But even with those considerations, nonverbal cues can be incredibly valuable for understanding what someone is really communicating.
It's about becoming a more astute observer, not just listening to the words, but paying attention to the full picture.
So we've got eye contact, we're paying attention to nonverbal cues. What's next?
Well, the article has this really cool technique for boosting comprehension, creating mental images.
Mental images, what do you mean?
Basically, you picture what the speaker is saying as they're saying it.
Oh, okay.
It can be a literal image, or it could be a way of organizing the information visually in your mind.
Interesting.
The article suggests focusing on key words and phrases, especially in longer conversations, to help you remember the information better.
It's like creating mental bookmarks to anchor your attention. So we're staying focused, we're using mental imagery, and now comes a really important element.
Empathy.
Ah, yes, empathy. This is the heart of active listening.
It's about putting yourself in the other person's shoes, trying to understand their perspective and their feelings.
The article emphasizes that empathy is more than just recognizing emotions.
It's about actually feeling them alongside the speaker.
If they're sad, you allow yourself to feel sadness too.
If they're excited, you share in their excitement.
Exactly, and it doesn't mean you have to agree with them.
You just have to understand their emotional state and how it's influencing what they're saying and doing.
Right.
So we've got eye contact, attentiveness to nonverbal cues, mental imagery, empathy. What's next?
The next step is providing feedback.
Feedback.
Yes. It's crucial to show the speaker that you're engaged in understanding what they're saying.
Okay, how do we do that?
It can be as simple as nodding your head, using appropriate facial expressions, or even reflecting the speaker's emotions back to them.
So it's like saying, I hear you, I see you, and I get how you're feeling. Exactly. And in a work setting, the article stresses the importance of clarifying instructions and confirming your understanding to avoid costly mistakes.
Makes sense. We've covered eye contact, attentiveness, nonverbal cues, mental imagery, empathy, feedback. What's the final technique?
The last one is all about open-mindedness.
Ah, this is where it gets challenging, right? Listening without judgment, without immediately forming a counter-argument in our heads.
Precisely. The article encourages us to embrace discomfort, to resist the urge to compare or evaluate while the other person is speaking.
It's about absorbing their perspective, even if it challenges our own.
Yes, recognizing that everyone has a story to tell, and our job as listeners is simply to receive it. And that openness is a great segue into a concept that the article calls mindful listening.
Mindful listening. Okay, tell me more about that.
It's like taking all those techniques we just talked about and weaving them together into a more intentional and powerful way of listening.
So it's not just about passively hearing the words, but really being present and engaged in the moment.
Exactly. And you know that statistic about only remembering 25% of a lecture?
Yeah, it was pretty shocking.
Mindful listening is like the antidote to that. It helps you actually absorb and retain information much better.
Especially in those emotionally charged conversations where it's easy to get sidetracked by your own reactions.
Right, like those tough conversations with your partner or a heated debate at work.
Where you're more focused on defending your own point of view than actually listening to the other person.
Exactly. So how do we actually practice mindful listening? The article breaks it down into 3 key elements.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
First up is intention.
Intention. Okay.
It's about creating the right mindset for listening.
So like setting the stage for a good conversation.
Precisely. The article suggests taking a few moments to clear your head before a conversation.
Like a mental reset.
Yeah. Maybe do a quick body scan or a short meditation if that's your thing.
I can see how that would be helpful, shifting from go, go, go mode to a more receptive state.
Exactly. And then comes cue awareness.
Cue awareness. What's that all about?
It's about paying attention to those physical and emotional signals that pop up during a conversation.
You mean like if I start to feel my heart racing or my palms getting sweaty?
Exactly. Or maybe you notice your jaw clenching or your shoulders tightening up.
Those are definitely signs that I'm not feeling super relaxed.
Right. And instead of letting those sensations take over, mindful listening encourages you to simply observe them without judgment.
So it's about recognizing those signals, but not letting them dictate my reactions.
Precisely. You're basically hitting the pause button on your emotional autopilot.
I like that analogy. So we've got intention, we've got cue awareness. What's the third element?
The third element brings us back to empathy, but with a slightly different focus. Empathetic listening.
Okay, so we talked about empathy as a general technique, but now it's more specific.
Right. It's not just about understanding the speaker's emotions, but also about actively validating their perspective.
Even if you don't necessarily agree with them.
Exactly. The article makes a really important distinction here. Validation does not equal agreement.
Okay, that makes sense. I can see how that would be helpful in diffusing tense situations.
It's like saying, I hear you, I see where you're coming from, and I respect your viewpoint, even if it's different from mine.
And that kind of validation can go a long way in building trust and understanding.
Absolutely. Especially in today's world where it's so easy to get caught up in our own echo chambers and polarized viewpoints.
So we've explored a lot of ground here, from practical techniques like eye contact and nonverbal cues to the more nuanced concept of mindful listening. What stands out to you as the most impactful takeaway?
For me, it's the realization that listening is not a passive activity.
It's something we can actively cultivate and improve upon.
Exactly. And it's a skill that can benefit every aspect of our lives. It really is. And that's interesting, host speaker. What's that? The article even touches on how these so-called soft skills, like listening and empathy, host speaker. Yeah, they're actually becoming increasingly valuable in the workplace these days, host speaker.
That makes sense though, right? I mean, in a world where technology is kind of taking over a lot of our interactions. Yeah.
Those human connection skills, those are the things that really set us apart.
Exactly. Think about it like building trust with colleagues, or, working effectively in teams, or even just navigating all those tricky interpersonal situations that we all encounter at work.
Yeah, for sure.
Good listening. It's really at the heart of all of that.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of listening, what's one key takeaway that you hope our listeners will walk away with today?
I'd encourage everyone listening to take a moment and just reflect on their own listening habits.
Yeah. Like, which of the techniques that we talked about today, which ones really resonated with you? Is there one area where you feel like you could maybe make a conscious effort to improve?
That's a great point. It's not about, trying to master all 7 techniques overnight.
Right.
It's about finding those little things, those small shifts that you can make that can actually have a big impact on how you listen and connect with others.
Exactly. Maybe it's just being more aware of your nonverbal cues, like making eye contact and using appropriate facial expressions. Or maybe it's, practicing that empathetic listening, really trying to understand the other person's perspective, even if you don't agree with them.
I love that. And I think, what's really cool about this deep dive is that it's given us not just information, but also inspiration. It's reminded me of just how powerful good listening can be in our lives.
Yeah, it really is. Because when we truly listen, when we really open ourselves up to what the other person is saying, it creates space for understanding and connection and growth.
Absolutely. It enriches not just our relationships with other people, but also our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Exactly.
So to our listeners out there, go forth and listen deeply, listen with intention, listen with curiosity, and I think you'll be amazed by what you discover, both in others and in yourselves.
Couldn't have said it better myself.